Sonar standard, starboard wheel, steer 270.
A single torpedo from one of those submarines can break a warship in two and put it on the bottom.
It's known as the silent service. In the darkest corners of the ocean, submarines lurk, listening and waiting to strike.
We sort of have a submarine fetish in this country. We are obsessed with submarines. We seem to have this view that if we get submarines right, all of our security woes will be solved.
The plan to build 8 nuclear-powered submarines in Australia is the country's largest ever defence project.
We will become the 7th country in the world to operate a nuclear-powered submarine. We've never operated a military capability in such a small group before.
The government tells us this is a golden ticket, an invitation to an elite club, binding us ever closer to the United States.
I'm proud to be your shipmates.
To say that it is not high risk would be misleading. Of course it's high risk.
There are questions whether a fleet of nuclear submarines will be enough to deter China's ambitions in the Pacific. In the meantime, we are left vulnerable, relying only on the ageing Collins class.
In terms of a catastrophic failure with the age of Collins, I think there is a probability that we will have more accidents. There's no doubt, the equipment will fail.
Fulfilling this nuclear dream will cost up to $368 billion. That's $32 million a day for the next 32 years.
On this episode of Four Corners, we uncover serious shortfalls in Australia's nuclear ambitions and reveal major delays and safety issues within our existing Collins-class submarines, which must remain our frontline deterrent for at least the next decade.
It's departure day. This Collins-class submarine is being put through its final checks. It's leaving from HMAS Stirling, south of Perth, which is home to Australia's fleet of diesel-electric submarines.
Touch on the wharf, touch on the casing.
Despite ambitions to go nuclear, it's the Collins that will remain our main submarine force well into the 2030s and beyond.
The Collins-class submarine capability is still one of, if not the most capable conventional submarines in service in any navy.
Let go, toes! Let go, toes!
The Navy tells us the Collins remains a lethal capability, but as every year passes, they become more unreliable and vulnerable.
The fundamental issue with Collins is we know it's in a sense on the clock now. I mean, it is a good submarine now and it's doing a great job now, and it will for a number of years to come. But there is going to become a point in time where that capability will diminish.
To combat this inevitable decline and China's growing power, we're teaming up with the United States and the United Kingdom. The US will sell us at least 3 used Virginia-class nuclear submarines by the early 2030s. 10 years later, a newly designed UK and US submarine, built in Australia, is scheduled to hit the water.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, accompanied by the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
The United States could not ask for two better friends or partners to stand with as we work to create a safer, more peaceful future for the people everywhere. I'm proud to be your shipmates. Thank you.
Since the details of the AUKUS partnership were announced, the government has been out selling the deal.
The AUKUS agreement we confirm here in San Diego represents the biggest single investment in Australia's defence capability in all of our history, strengthening Australia's national security and stability in our region.
Thank you all very, very much.
They are trying to justify the eye-watering price tag of between $268 and $368 billion over the life of the project.
Nuclear-powered submarines can manoeuvre while remaining undetected and strike without warning.
I think it elevates Australia to the greatest defence capability, the greatest military capability that we've ever operated. And that's for good reason, because we live in a world which is much more strategically complex and more strategically threatening.
The situation is deteriorating, and it is a very, very challenging and arguably the most complex and challenging environment that our nation has faced in the Indo-Pacific in decades. Ideally, I'd like a couple of Virginia-class tomorrow. We don't live in an ideal world. I have to deal with the realities.
There are benefits in going nuclear. Speed is one of the major advantages of a nuclear submarine like the US Virginia class. If a war with Beijing over Taiwan erupted, it could leave Perth headquarters and be in the South China Sea in 6.5 days. A Collins would take almost 3 weeks. And it would also need to surface or snorkel every few days to recharge its batteries, leaving it vulnerable to detection and attack.
If you're the captain of a conventional submarine, you're constantly asking yourself, can I complete this mission without having to snorkel? Will I have to withdraw from the mission halfway through before it's completed? If I'm detected, can I escape? So it does impose a lot of limits on a conventional submarine.
A nuclear submarine, with its almost limitless energy supply, can stay on its mission far longer. Once near Taiwan, a Virginia class could operate underwater for at least 3 months. A Collins could only stay for 11 days before needing to return to Australia and refuel.
As you look to the 2030s and 2040s, conventional submarines will not provide the deterrent effect and the lethality advantage that they currently do.
A Collins is only half the length of the latest model of its US counterpart, which means fewer weapons. The Collins has 22 torpedoes and missiles, and no vertical launchers, which are designed to hit targets on land. The Virginia submarine can carry 25 torpedoes and between 12 and 40 vertically launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. That's 3 times the payload.
So the submarines are designed and built as weapons of war. They have exceptional capabilities when it comes to creating a deterrent effect, creating question marks in the minds of regional military and naval leaders, shaping their calculus. Every time we put a submarine to sea, it reshapes the calculus of regional leaders.
As Australia waits for its nuclear submarines, there are serious problems with the Collins class. The submarine we filmed leaving the base in Perth is one of the most troubled in the Navy's fleet. In early 2021, HMAS Waller flooded twice while at sea. And then just weeks later, an electrical fire broke out on board. This was despite the Navy having just completed 24 months of scheduled maintenance on the submarine.
In terms of our ability to put boats in the water, it certainly kept Waller out of the water for an extended period of time while they had to repair equipment. So if you lose a submarine out of a pool of 6, that reduces the amount of submarines that are operational.
The story of how the Collins class is presented versus the reality is perhaps best told through its flagship. The Navy released this slick video to mark the return of HMAS Collins to service in December 2017. What it didn't say was that HMAS Collins had spent the previous 5.5 years out of the water, being raided for parts. The submarine is once again back on dry land and in deep maintenance. It has now spent 6 of the last 12 years out of the water.
We had a situation when Collins first arrived in that the submarine was not reliable. We did get improvements over time with the maintenance of those submarines, but they're now getting a little bit long in the tooth. We're going to see more and more problems.
Rex Patrick joined the Navy at 16 and was one of the first Australians to serve on the Collins class more than 25 years ago.
Life on a submarine is a pretty unique experience. There's very few other jobs that are like it in any way, shape or form. It's a cramped environment. You're working very closely with a highly professional crew, doing very interesting work. Long hours. Sometimes you go for weeks on end without rest and without even surfacing the submarine.
He likens the Collins to an ageing car, but Australia doesn't have the luxury of trading it in, as any replacement submarines are at least 10 years away.
When you first buy a car, you have a period where there are infantile failures that are covered by the warranty period. Then the car goes okay for a number of years, and after a period of time you start having things go wrong. That's normally the time in which you might sell the car. We're at that stage with Collins.
To investigate the problems plaguing our 6 Collins-class submarines, we went to where they were built and now maintained.
Hi, Rex.
Hey.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Come on
nice
board.
to meet you.
Okay, let's go up here.
Rex Patrick is our guide. Up Adelaide's Port River is the government-owned shipbuilder ASC.
This is the birthplace of the Collins class submarines, and this is where all of the deep level maintenance for these submarines occur.
So which submarine are we looking at here?
This is HMAS Deschano. It's just come out of a full cycle docking, so it's basically had itself stripped apart and now it's back together, and they'll be doing a bunch of harbour testing on systems to make sure that they're working properly.
The Deschano has been here for 2.5 years being refitted.
We might just have a bit of company here. What are these guys doing? Sorry, what's the... Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you say that again?
It's an offence against the Crimes Act to be filming near the submarine in the Navy waters.
Sorry, we're filming here. We're in public waters. We're filming. What's the problem?
When pushed on why we couldn't film, they quickly backed down.
The naval rep says they're happy for you guys to film, but we just need to know who you are to make sure that you've got that permission.
Okay. Sorry, but yeah, we're Four Corners from the ABC.
Just from the ABC?
Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
Is that secrecy unnecessary?
It's on a river in which any craft can drive past, and people can take photographs, people can take videos. So it's a little bit silly for the ASC to come out and suggest that it's improper to film.
So does this give you an indication of the secrecy that we see in Defence?
Defence is overly secret about everything that it does. There are many things that are secret in Defence, but there are lots of things that simply should be talked about openly.
7.5 minutes.
One area Defence is reluctant to discuss is how Australia's 6 Collins-class submarines are performing.
Range 4,100 yards.
We've spent weeks cross-checking official data from the Navy website, news reports and satellite images to see what's been going on for the last 10 years.
We've discovered over the last 2 years the Navy has not met its targets. And in September 2021, we found the Navy had just 2 boats in the water. More astonishingly, at the start of this year, there was just 1 battle-ready submarine in the entire fleet.
Hi, Minister. Angus Grigg.
Angus, how are you?
Yeah,
Good to see
very
you.
well. Take a seat.
Thanks.
Defence Minister Richard Marles concedes relying on the Collins for the next 10 to 20 years is not ideal.
As we look to the future, the issue with the Collins is even if we put more equipment on it, and we will, that fact will mean that it is more detectable in the late 2030s than it was when it came into service. And in that sense, the fundamental capability is one which is on the long-term decline.
But when pushed on the operational performance of the Collins, the Minister refused to provide details, suggesting the information would compromise national security.
What's your understanding of the operational capability of the Collins class as it stands today?
We have the number of submarines required to be in operational service that we plan for. And I can't say more than that.
But this is publicly available information that clearly shows that we're not meeting the targets. So how can you say we have a robust capability?
Again, what Collins can do is a formidable capability, and it's important that people understand that.
I haven't made these numbers up. They're numbers on a Navy website.
And I can say with certainty that the submarines that we need to have on operation in order to fulfil our nation's submarine task are there to be on operation, and we are fulfilling that task.
I'm just not sure how the Australian people can be confident that we do have this, given the data that we've been able to find very easily.
Well, I mean, you've asked that question, and obviously you can keep asking it a few more times if you want. And for obvious reasons, I can't give you anything more because, this goes to the heart of a classified space.
The head of the Navy has a different view.
At this particular point in time, we're not at full capacity. But the forecast based upon the submarine briefs that I received earlier this week is that over the next 12 months that will normalise. So it's no secret that there were some maintenance period overruns that are attributed to the pandemic and the supply chain issues, but I'm confident we're over that hump.
As it stands now, you have 1 deployable submarine, you've got 1 in workup. Of the 4 submarines that are supposedly available to the head of the Navy, you only have 2. So we are at half capacity now with our submarine fleet.
That's not entirely true. We are coming out of the shadows of the COVID-19 pandemic, where there have been maintenance period overruns associated with closed borders, supply chain issues, and in some cases workforce challenges, as in industry workforce challenges. So we're not over the hump yet, but we are returning to full availability of the Collins class capability.
But you're not there yet?
No, not entirely, no.
Unsurprisingly, we will start with AUKUS and then...
Given the state of the Collins class, there are real concerns about whether we can run a vastly more complex nuclear program.
We don't even know...
While in opposition, Senator Penny Wong raised serious questions about the ageing fleet.
So we nurse them through to the 2050s. Just so we're really clear, we extend the Collins for as long as possible and hope that can go long enough for us to get the time to get a nuclear submarine in the water. Correct? That's the government's current plan. Pretty risky, don't you reckon?
Penny was accurate in describing the problems. Now that she's in government, she basically has to paint a rosy picture because that's what governments do. They like people to think that everything's okay. The reality is the situation hasn't changed from where it was a couple of years ago.
She's got a fair question, doesn't she?
She absolutely has a fair question, and I think, to be honest, that's exactly the plan that we inherited when we came to office.
It's not much of a plan, though, is it?
Well, it's something of dealing with the capability gap, but it's not a great answer to dealing with the capability gap.
Former Defence Department analyst Marcus Hellier worked on the Navy's submarine project.
If we don't have Collins, we have no submariners, and you cannot bring a nuclear submarine fleet into service without a robust number of submariners. So we have to keep Collins going. And again, all the attention, is on the nuclear future. We can't lose sight of the Collins fleet. It's going to keep a lot of money to keep Collins going. It's going to be ageing, it potentially becoming more unreliable, spending less days at sea, but we've got to find a way to keep Collins going. Otherwise, we don't have a submarine force.
That means the Navy needs to keep the ailing Collins class in the water for a further 20 years, costing another $6 billion.
They're not getting any younger.
Former submariner Brent Clark served on the Collins class. He's sceptical about the plan to refit them and extend their service.
So this is a schematic of the Collins. Looking at here, so from 2026 onwards, they're going to do this life of type extension.
Yes.
So what are they going to pull out here and replace on this submarine?
Well, I think the particularly large items, so they're going to have to cut the submarine in half, effectively sort of down past the escape trunking, they'll cut that in half, and they'll do that to pull out the diesel engines, and they'll do that to replace the submarine main motor, so they're getting a new submarine main motor and new diesel engines. There'll be electronic and system upgrades throughout the rest of the submarine as you get that submarine sort of back up as modern as you can make it.
Do you think it's realistic that in 2 years they can have the boat back in the water?
I think that will be a stretch.
If he's right, the Navy will struggle to have its full fleet in the water in the years before the nuclear submarines arrive. Australia is in this position after years of missteps and political indecision. The government has been talking about replacing the Collins for almost 2 decades. They'd originally planned for the next generation of submarines to be in the water by the mid-2020s.
When the Collins class replacement was first announced, the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government wanted to have an Australian-designed son of Collins. Mr Abbott came along, he wanted a Japanese submarine. Mr Turnbull came along, he changed the pathway to a French submarine, and then we've seen Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese going to a US followed by a British submarine.
The Japanese proposal was going to cost $50 billion. The French deal eventually blew out to $80 billion. Now, the nuclear deal is forecast to cost almost 5 times this amount, hitting the taxpayer for $32 million a day, every day, for 32 years.
That's well over half of the Navy's budget, potentially 2/3 of the Navy's budget. So, that illustrates the nature of the opportunity cost. If you're spending that money on nuclear submarines, you're not spending it on your surface fleet, on your amphibious fleet, on your patrol fleet. I think the bottom line is you can't have nuclear submarines plus all of the other capabilities that the government seems to want.
The Prime Minister confirmed this at the release of the government's latest review of defence spending.
This represents a document for today
What he didn't say was that making submarines the #1 priority meant $7.8 billion worth of cuts to other military projects.
What we've done here through the Defence Strategic Review is look at what assets do we need and where do we need them. So we make no apologies for that just not being all pluses.
You could say a lot about life at sea.
Money is not the only hurdle. To get a nuclear fleet, the Navy will need to navigate a complicated 3-stage process.
Submarines are a bit like a queen in a game of chess. You think very carefully and strategically about how you position and employ them.
We're talking about underwater aerospace technology. We're talking about naval nuclear propulsion. It's two things that our nation has to come to grips with. Of course it's high risk, and we're being very, very transparent about that.
The first step is having US and UK nuclear submarines in Australia training our Navy. Then in the early 2030s, the Virginia class will arrive.
I don't think we'll have as many problems with the Virginia class. They are a proven design. The United States Navy knows exactly how to operate them and keep them running.
Rex Patrick is worried about the next step, the difficulties of building our own nuclear submarine. It will combine a US nuclear reactor and weapons system with a British-designed submarine.
The British are consistently late, they're consistently over budget, and there are some questions as to whether or not the submarine that pops out of their industry will in fact be as good as the Virginia-class submarines that they will purportedly replace.
He doubts we will ever get this Anglo-American submarine.
It's unlikely, in my view, that once we've established ourselves on the Virginia pathway, when we've got some good, highly capable US submarines, that we will then step off that pathway and onto a very risky and costly program. I don't think a future government would necessarily embark on that final stage.
A nuclear submarine, that's a...
Marcus Hellier says despite the destructive capability of nuclear submarines, Australia will still only have a small fleet. Even with the US fleet in the Pacific, there's concerns that we'll struggle to match China's firepower. Beijing has the world's largest navy, with 66 submarines, 12 of which are nuclear powered.
A fleet of 8 will give you 2 or 3 that are deployable, so that, $268 to $368 billion investment potentially gives you 3 boats at sea. Very capable, powerful boats, but still only 3 boats.
Commodore Peter Scott spent 34 years in the Navy, captaining 2 Collins-class submarines. He retired in 2017 as Director General's Submarines. He says one of the biggest risks of going nuclear is the lack of submariners, and that the Navy may need to triple the number to nearly 3,000.
I think there's no doubt that we've under-resourced the submarine capability over past years, no doubt. If you fail to bring in, for example, an adequate number of junior warfare officers in any given year, you will end up with a dearth of commanding officers a decade or so later, because there's no side avenue. People need to come in at the bottom, learn the trade, build their experience, build their expertise to be able to move up through the chain and perform at higher levels and take greater responsibility.
Our investigation also found Australia is heavily reliant on overseas commanders to run the fleet. Using open source naval data, we discovered 4 officers from foreign navies have captained Australian submarines over the last 3 years.
Well, I think it goes to that point that we perhaps haven't had the depth and strength of our submarine workforce that we might have needed in the past.
How then are we going to crew much larger and more complex submarines as part of a nuclear program?
Yeah, so it's not an unsolvable problem. You know, with a submarine capability, absolutely with a nuclear submarine capability, you cannot leave your workforce to chance. And it requires determination.
So how are we going to have 12 to 14 captains to crew 3 class of vessels?
Well, we'll need to do better than we've done in the past.
At submarine headquarters in Perth, we met a foreign-trained officer captaining an Australian submarine.
Hi there, good morning. Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard one of the Collins-class submarines.
Thanks very much.
Would you like to go down below?
Yeah, can we have a look?
Please.
Commander Paul transferred across from the Canadian Navy.
2, 1, and you're down.
Okay, wow. It's
Welcome
pretty tight.
aboard.
Yeah, thank you. Pretty tight in here.
It can be, yes.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Shall we have a look around?
Let's go.
He was tasked with showing us around, but was not allowed to speak more broadly.
Okay. So just straight down this way. Watch your head as we go through. So this is the control room where we run the operations and the daily routine from the submarine. We like to consider it the brain. We can control all of our systems from forward as need be, depth control, weight comp, fueling, diesels, and then we drive from up forward here. And
So this guy's driving the sub?
He's driving the submarine, yeah. So it's one person here who controls both depth and attitude, so moves us around. And then, of course, the thing everyone loves to see is the periscopes. So this is our forward periscope, the Search. If you'd like to use it, on the right here is to turn it left and right, and the left side to look up and down.
Okay, so this is how... Oh, wow, I can see up. Okay. Yeah, nice. Huh. Amazing.
We need to be very, very careful. We can't set ourselves up to wholly and solely rely on overseas people coming and commanding our submarines. We, again, will fail. Ultimately, this has got to be a sovereign submarine capability for Australia. We have to develop our own people, we have to train our own people, and we have to make sure that that's what we're doing.
Training operation complete.
Former submariner Brent Clark fears the lack of captains may even spark tensions with our allies.
There's a difference between people making a decision to emigrate to Australia and be part of the Australian nuclear program and us as a country going out and recruiting them. And I think if we started to go out and actively recruit out of the United States and actively recruit out of the United Kingdom, one would imagine those governments would be reasonably upset with us.
The Australian way of life is very appealing. I think that what we offer is enticing. We don't deliberately seek applications from submariners from other navies. The reality is there's a lot of interest in what we do, and particularly the Collins-class capability. There's a lot of respect for it, and people want to be a part of what we do.
Diving now, diving now.
Aye, sir. Diving now, diving now.
This is what life's like on one of Australia's Collins-class submarines. So this is the wardroom, or the officer's mess if you like. And if we go through here, you've got to watch your head. It's very cramped in here, and this is where 5 of those officers would sleep, and really only this curtain for privacy. And bear in mind they could spend up to 3 months on a mission living in these type of conditions. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to recruit people for Australia's submarine program. A critical challenge will be building a whole new industry and an entire workforce to support it. This is Australia's only nuclear reactor, used almost entirely for medicine and scientific research. Over the course of the next 30 years, the plan is to add at least 11 new reactors to power our new fleet of submarines. That's going to require a whole new industry built around safety, maintenance, and the always controversial issue of what to do with highly contaminated waste.
This is the reactor pool, yes.
Hefin Griffiths is the Chief Nuclear Officer at ANSTO, the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation. He previously worked in the British Navy's nuclear program. In terms of the size of that reactor, how does it compare to a nuclear submarine?
Well, ours is 20 megawatts. A submarine, you could say, might be 10 times more than that.
So the same size, but 10 times more powerful?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And that's the high enriched uranium that gives it that pull?
Yes.
As part of the AUKUS agreement, Australia will be responsible for storing this weapons-grade waste, which remains radioactive for 20,000 years. At the moment, we can't even agree on a permanent place to store low-level nuclear waste.
We don't have a permanent facility for that at this stage?
That is the National Radioactive Waste Management Facility that's been developed by AWA in Kimber in South Australia.
Which has been held up for a long time?
It is going through appropriate judicial challenge at the moment.
But I guess that shows the scale or just how difficult the problem is, that even low-level stuff like this, at the moment, we're struggling to find a disposal for that.
Yeah, I think we're as close to finding a solution to that as we have been.
We need only look to the UK to see how bad the waste problem can become. There are 2 floating nuclear graveyards in southwest England for 21 submarines the Royal Navy can't get rid of. This includes HMS Dreadnought, which has spent 43 years at this dock, more than twice as long as it was in service.
Above this carbon fibre.
Yeah, so basically.
The next obstacle is training enough engineers to build and service the nuclear program.
So is this the type of place we're going to train the next generation of engineers?
Oh, absolutely. Laboratories like this and other state-of-the-art teaching facilities.
So we put a bearing in this bit.
We need to pretty much double the number of engineers that we're training anyway.
And what about AUKUS? How big an opportunity is that?
Jane McMaster from Engineers Australia says Defence will be competing for talent in a tight market.
The whole workforce will be required to support the AUKUS capability. Even before AUKUS, we projected that around 50,000 or more engineers would be needed across the Australian economy before around 2030. It's quite hard to put your finger on a definitive number, but it's in the order of tens of thousands. So when we bring AUKUS into the picture, it's another few thousand engineers on top of that, and so it's already an enormous challenge.
This scheme goes to the 2 vital needs of Australia.
The former aerospace engineer likens the challenge of going nuclear to the snowy hydro scheme of the 1950s and 60s.
The nuclear-powered submarine capability is an order of magnitude greater in terms of scale and complexity and uncertainty. But I think it is possible. It just depends on how we all work together from here on in.
So you're saying it's bigger than Snowy Hydro, this national project we're embarking on?
It is a huge project that covers the entire workforce, many professions, many layers of complexity, and it's not as simple as buying an off-the-shelf product from the UK or the US. So there are layers of complexity here that I'm not sure that we've grappled with before.
By the time the first locally built nuclear sub goes into the water, it could be compromised by large numbers of uncrewed underwater drones. To counter this, the Navy is rushing a drone into service.
It was 161 days from first approach to us being in contract in a true co-development program.
Named the Ghost Shark, it will be built by a Silicon Valley startup and will use artificial intelligence.
This is the Dive LD. It's the commercial variant that we sell to a range of different industries.
David Goodrich is Executive Chairman of Anduril Australia, which is funding half the $140 million project with Defence.
What's the urgency?
I think the urgency is that the Indo-Pacific and the geopolitical circumstances writ large have never been more unstable than they are at this point in time. I think everybody understands there's also an undersea capability gap that's looming.
What's the capability gap that you see looming?
I think there's a difference in the time frame between the life of the Collins-class submarines and the new AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines that needs to be filled.
No, this has got nothing to do with vulnerability of the Collins class. This has got everything to do with the development of capabilities that could be deployed from the Collins class or our future classes of submarines, or from surface ships, or from land. It's a recognition that there is a role and a place for unmanned systems underwater, and that technology is now developing to the point where we can start to leverage those opportunities.
The Chinese are years ahead. They have already deployed drones to the deepest parts of the ocean and are at the cutting edge of unmanned technology.
We are falling behind, and the reason for that is because in China specifically, there is no gap between the commercial market and the defence market. There's this thing that they call civil-military fusion, and the West has not actually done that very well in the past, particularly in the United States.
The battle space, whether it's air, land or sea, will be saturated with large numbers of uncrewed, cheaper, disposable platforms. Those cheaper, autonomous systems, while they may not be able to replace a nuclear submarine, they can potentially stop it from doing its job. You know, they can make the operating environment too dangerous for a nuclear submarine to go into.
As China embarks on the biggest military build-up since World War II, Australia is entering a dangerous decade. Despite a staggering price tag for the new submarines, the country will have to wait 30 years for the full fleet to be built. Until then, we have no choice but to rely on the ailing Collins-class submarines to be our silent strike force.
In an ideal world, we would be looking at a new class of submarine today, and we wouldn't be spending $6 billion keeping an older submarine going, but we're not living in an ideal world today.
So every major regional navy has expanded and modernised their submarine fleets in the past 20 years, and we have not. So if there's an undersea arms race in the Indo-Pacific, we are not leading it today.